To get us started, for those in the audience who mostly know your publication by the stories you read and haven't really given a great deal of thought of it, could you share a little bit more about your employers and the roles that you have there?
Okay, Grand Rapids Business Journal is part of the Gemini Publications family, which also includes Grand Rapids Magazine, Michigan Blue Magazine, grmag.com, and grbj.com. I'm managing editor at the Business Journal for the Business Journal side of things. I've been doing that for almost half of the paper's existence, 18 out of 36 years. So I've been around in this community for a while.
So I'm at MLive, which is sort of a creation out of the former Booth newspapers chain. I'm in the Grand Rapids office of MLive, which means that my stories are primarily printed in the Grand Rapids Press, but they do appear in newspapers like the Kalamazoo Gazette, Muskegon Chronicle, the Flint Journal, all of the MLive newspapers across the state. So I would assume that most of you are probably familiar with MLive. It was a company that was kind of created out of the Booth newspapers chain in 2012. It's part of the Advance family of publications, and so if you follow national news across the country, you might recognize some similarities in the MLive, from the MLive website at places like NOLA.com, which is the New Orleans Times-Picayune, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Portland Oregonian. Those are what would be considered sister publications to MLive underneath the Advance banner. So personally, I'm MLive Grand Rapids, and that's where you'll find my stuff.
The Rapidian.org was founded in September 2009 and is a product of the Grand Rapids Community Media Center, which also includes WICE, a community-powered radio station, GRTV, public access TV, and Wealthy Theater, which does community theater and hosts a number of meetings and community events year-round. The Rapidian is entirely powered by members of the community, so all of our content comes from citizens, individual writers, and nonprofit entities. My role there is managing editor, which means I go out and build relationships with writers and nonprofit organizations, look for partnerships with other like-minded entities that are community-based organizations, and build relationships with neighborhood associations to get coverage. So anywhere that a potential story might exist, I'm out there looking to build a relationship and help get that story told on the Rapidian.
My name is Mariano Avila. I'm a journalist with WGVU, which is NPR and PBS in West Michigan. So I guess, first of all, thank you for having us, because we're both with WGVU here today. And my role is for radio primarily to generate stories that you would listen to, regular news stories. And for television, it's to host a show called Mutually Inclusive, which is a combination of town halls and documentaries. And so we have a little bit more room than daily news to produce stories that, as we say, breathe. So we try to go a little bit more in depth with stories and focus on, I guess, longer coverage and in-depth journalism.
I see people I've interviewed. It's exciting. Good that you're here. Thank you for this. The mission of WGVU is to provide educational, informative, and entertaining programs and events. So that's why we are proud of our work. We are WGVU Television and Radio, commonly called WGVU Public Media. And yes, ability to long form our interviews is what makes us different. In addition to local, we're responsible for the local opportunities. My probably major platform is from 9 to 11, producing and hosting the WGVU morning show. So that's where I want to get your word out. Plus the public affairs programs of Community Connection, Family Health Matters, and we also do an Art Unfiltered for our YouTube station. So lots of platforms out there, and that's why I'm looking at future interviewees in the audience.
Starting with Shelley and working our way back, can you tell us a little about your editorial vision? How do you decide what to feature? What types of stories do you believe, or do you know that your readers or listeners are most interested in? And I guess just kind of get it out of the way. If people in the audience are interested in making you aware of their work, what's the best way to go about doing that?
Thank you. Educate, entertain, and inform. If your story fits one, two, hopefully all three, then you are certainly welcome. My platform personally is, again, between 9 to 11. I can offer you 10 to 12 minutes of storytelling. We don't want to make it a commercial, but certainly we let our listeners know how to get in touch with you. That's my job, is to be the in-between. I'm very lucky to have relationships in the community that can bring me interviews. Once a month, I will literally do a segment called Sustainable Community Voices. Once a month, I will do an interview with those on behalf of Local First, on behalf of WEMIAC. Naturally speaking, those from the DNR join in. Spotlight on the Farm, so we're touching sustainability in a wide variety of ways. Getting Green is another segment as well. I have a great relationship with Renee Hesselink, who I think has been involved with the Green Building, U.S. Green Building Council in your West Michigan, who is one of my funneling, and I respect her enough and that she oftentimes delegates who I'll be speaking with. The Community Connection Program is another opportunity to spotlight 10 minutes of you and your organization in a tape format for the television side. All of our interviews or podcasts are available online, so even though I only get 10 minutes with you, you know the power of social media and how we can make that work. I'd like to think that our listeners and our viewers will come away with, I want to get involved with this organization. I didn't know that about this, so I want to make sure that I follow up, and that means that we've done a pretty good job. And again, in a conversational format. I'm very rare that I'll ask why we should care. I want to be there so that your missions and events are shared. Basically, the best way, since I'm very fortunate to be able to make most of the decisions, is to get my email and email me and say, Shelley, I have a great idea for the show on any of your formats. How can we make this happen? And then we just basically go through our schedules, and whether you want to hit the live time between 9 to 11, or if you're more comfortable with the taping, it's all about how that works. I can have in the radio land up to 3 guests. So again, we want to make this as fulfilling as possible, and the television usually a couple guests with our Community Connection. So I have some really nice platforms, and it just comes down to communicating and you making the first move to getting your word out, because if I had 25 hours in a day, maybe we could do it, but unfortunately I can't go through the MLives and see what else is making news. So you coming to me is the best way that I get to work. So like I say, many more of you need to come to me. So it's a good platform.
Same question?
Same question.
All right. So my focus is on inclusion and equity primarily, which means I look for racialized outcomes and then try to follow the sources of that conversation. So if we're talking about African American infant mortality, for example, 2 to 4 times more likely to have poor birth outcomes if you're African American than if you're pretty much any other ethnicity. And why is that? So I track that down. If you have a story of inclusion or equity, you can reach me through my email or on Facebook. You just saw my picture, so just look for that picture and you'll find me. My email is AV as in Victor, ILA, Avila, and then MA, so Avilama, if that helps you, at gvsu.edu. And yeah, depending on what it is, sometimes we do get to celebrate. So, for example, we did a lunar festival for the Chinese American community and Asian American community. There was no inequity in that one. It was just a community that wanted to celebrate downtown and have a big event, but it's not a community that gets a heck of a lot of coverage. So I showed up, and we did a mini documentary about 8 minutes long, and that was fun. We did that for the actual Asian festival, which was the first one last year, and I think what other things we've done powwows, things like that, you know, where there are communities that are undercovered, underserved, and we get to go out and say, hey, we'd love to cover your event. But there's also some that are not as much fun. So yeah, you can reach me that way.
Sure. I guess I got my own mic. As I mentioned earlier, our editorial vision is entirely determined by what members of the community care about at any given moment in time. So we see a direct response to what's happening in local politics and in local government, what's happening locally with businesses, which is what many of you, I think, are most interested in. But most recently, we've seen people stepping up to tell their slice of the story in the community that they might not feel is being told anywhere else. And that's the great thing about what we do. So we not only offer the platform, but we offer training sessions quarterly so people can come and learn how to get involved with us at the Rapidian. We just hosted our first one of the year a couple weeks ago at the Grand Rapids Public Library downtown. And what we do is we tell you sort of the 5 W's of journalism: the who, what, when, where, and why quotes matter, why sources matter, and we attempt to equip you with everything that you need to then go out and tell the story that you find in your backyard or your neighborhood. So all of you are the experts. We are just hosting the platform to better serve the rest of the community with those stories. Most recently, we've seen, as Mariano mentioned, a great deal of interest in equality and equity of all kinds. People stepping up to speak out against unfair treatment, people stepping out against racism and discrimination, and telling the stories that they know best, and like I said, that often aren't covered elsewhere. So if you have something that you believe you're the expert on, then this is a platform where you can speak up and tell the story in your own words. And as editor, I make sure that it is fair, it is balanced, it's accurate, it's backed up. We can factually link to other resources about what it is that you're discussing, and then that story goes out to our thousands of readers in the community. One other area that we're strong in is neighborhood coverage in particular, as I mentioned earlier. So we go to the neighborhood associations and we say, hey, what's happening? What's important to you right now? How can we best tell that story? We were recently at the Grand Rapids Neighborhood Summit, which took place a couple weeks ago at GVSU right downtown, and we had a chance to do a couple of our workshops and speak to hundreds of average citizens who came by to talk about what was happening in their neighborhoods, in their school districts, in their backyards. So, like I said, our vision is really what the community wants to hear about, and we try to help people feel the most prepared to tell those stories.
Just to piggyback on that a little bit, I wanted to mention that I think the Rapidian is a very valuable publication to have in the Grand Rapids area. They fill a great niche in terms of getting down to the neighborhood level, on the streets, talking to people that, you know, as newsrooms across the country consolidate, and, you know, there has been pullbacks on what would be considered hyper-local coverage, you know, across the nation. It's those types of news outlets like the Rapidian do a really great job, I think, filling that niche. So I really enjoy their website. In terms of my editorial vision, I guess I'll give you mine, and you know, to some degree, the vision that is, you know, the company's vision or, the editor's vision. Quickly, though, if you want to get in touch with me, just Google search my name. My email address is out there. It's gellison@mlive.com. It's part of my byline. So if you read a story that I wrote right there at the top, click on it, and it's very easy to contact me. That said, I may not email you back. It's nothing personal, but having your email address out there and being kind of sought after in terms of as kind of an investigative reporter in what I'm doing, I get a lot of people that want me to take up their cause. Can you be, I have a crusade, and can you join me on it? And I feel bad sometimes telling people no, because maybe they do have a very worthy crusade. I just don't necessarily have the time or the resources to follow them down the rabbit hole. But there are exceptions. So as an environmental sort of investigative reporter or enterprise journalist, I prefer that term. I generate a lot of my own stories. I'm looking for stories in places where I think they're going to be. But that doesn't mean I certainly don't pay attention, or I'm not interested in getting emails or tips or that sort of thing. In fact, the Wolverine story was a tip. I had been working on PFAS stuff elsewhere, and somebody in Rockford recognized that and said, "Hey, did you know we've got a problem with that here?" And I said, "No, tell me more." So if you're paying attention to the work that I'm doing, that's probably a really good way to figure out whether or not I might be interested in any particular story you have to pass along, pitch, what have you. I'm kind of an anomaly, personally, within MLive and the Grand Rapids Press staff. I have sort of a longer leash to look into stories, than a lot of other reporters do. I don't have to turn around daily work on a daily basis, although I did that for a long time, and I understand, the importance of that, especially if you're a daily news source or a daily newspaper. But I'm glad to be doing stuff that's a little bit more in depth personally. It's just something that I've always really wanted to do. In terms of a vision, I look for things that are not getting the attention I think that they deserve. If I'm looking for things that the public ought to know more about, but for whatever reason they don't. I'm looking for stories that are on my beat in regards to those two things. I'm very keenly interested in water. In Michigan, water use, water protection, water contamination, not just drinking water, but surface water, groundwater, all of that stuff. And I think some of the big stories that I've worked on in the last few years have Nestle, bottled water, natural resource extraction, Wolverine, groundwater contamination, public health, major, I wouldn't say they're two sides of the same coin, but there's a common thread there. So, that's sort of, I guess in a nutshell, personally, how I look at things, how I evaluate things is are you coming to me with something that people really ought to know about? Is there something that's not getting the attention that it deserves and it's on my beat? If that's the case, then I'll definitely take a look at it. If it's something that I can't get to, maybe I'll try and pass it along and get somebody else in the newsroom to, take it up. Or I've pointed people in the past to other news outlets and saying, you know, there's really nobody here who can take that story, but you might have luck going, you know, to the Rapidian or other places and getting somebody interested in what you have to tell. In terms of our institutional vision, I think, you know, we're kind of the legacy media here. Grand Rapids Press is an institution that goes back more than 100 years in West Michigan. MLive is just kind of the current incarnation of it. And so we take that seriously still. We really want to be considered to be a community newspaper. At the same time, we're part of a statewide news organization, and you know, we do our best to balance those things. You know, as a legacy newspaper, the traditional role of newspapers is very much, you know, in the forefront of our minds. You know, the idea of a newspaper of record where everything in the community is printed and saved for the record is unfortunately something that is sort of come and gone, but at the same time, we really want to make sure that the people of Grand Rapids, West Michigan, have the information that they need to make decisions about how to self-govern. And to that extent, we're trying to put more attention on enterprise work, investigative work, public watchdog type of journalism, particularly over the last few years. And I'm pretty happy to have kind of fit into that that paradigm. I think that kind of answers the question, unless.
Garret, are there other enterprise reporters at MLive?
Yeah, not in Grand Rapids. We have this term at MLive called impact reporters. It was kind of created a couple of years ago, and there was an impact team put together post-Flint at MLive, and I was on it. Ron Fonger at the Flint Journal was on it. Julie Mack from the Kalamazoo Gazette was on it. Brad Devereaux from Saginaw was on it. There were others. And so at this point, that impact team has kind of become more of the public affairs team. And what they did is they split off reporters like myself, kind of put us back in our local hubs, which is just essentially the MLive office in Grand Rapids. I never really left that office. I just, you know, my supervisor was in Lansing for a year. You know, they put Ron Fonger back in Flint. They put Brad Devereaux in Kalamazoo. You know, so basically every MLive office now has more of an enterprise impact guy that's trying to do, you know, the more watchdog work, the stuff that's going to get, that's going to land with, you know, that's really going to, I guess, land and have some impact. Ideally, maybe make some change, you know, positive change, hopefully. But yeah, you know, we've all got. I'm not the only one, but I am the one in Grand Rapids, and you know, me being on the environment beat is sort of happenstance. That's just what I came to the impact team doing, and have been fortunate enough to, you know, be allowed to continue with it. So.
Well, as you might have ascertained, Business Journal, we cover business. It's not that hard. When we started out life, it was a business-to-business publication, which just means, you know, kind of stoic, kind of up there, that type of thing. We've evolved to cover some business to consumer, but not a lot. I guess the way we break it down, we try to follow the money and what it means. Where's the money going to? Where's it coming from? What's it being used for? how much of it's being spent. Nobody ever tells us that, but that's okay. We ask anyway. You probably get ticked at us. That's what we do. We've got 4 staff reporters who have a coverage area that's broken down by beats. If you're curious as to who they all are, you can go to grbj.com, and at the bottom of the page, of the front page, you can click on authors, and you will see wonderful pictures and, more importantly, the beat coverage of all of those people. Tells you what it is they're interested in, what it is they're following. In case you don't really want to do that, I'll just tell you, Justin Dawes is our sustainability reporter. And he's probably the guy that you're going to end up talking to on sustainability. But I think I want to caution you a little bit here. Yes, we are a business publication, but like I am sure every member of this panel will tell you, we're always in the market for interesting stories. That's what makes the media. That's why people listen or watch or read or do whatever they do. So we're looking for interesting stories, and if you think you've got an interesting story, you can obviously get in touch with us, and you can let us figure out what beat it goes to, how it's going to be presented. How do you do that? Call, I don't know. Well, don't call me because I never answer my phone. Call Justin. Poor guy, he's not here. I've also got some business cards up here. What's his number? Yeah. I got some business cards up here with my email, and absolutely, grab one if you feel like it. And, you know, it's not that hard. We just use our first initial and our last name, so if it's really Justin you want to get a hold of, feel free. But we're looking for interesting stories, and we're always looking to be able to tell that story. And with 4 reporters on staff, I get to know them very well. And I get to know their strengths and their weaknesses. And I would have to say that right now, even though we're about as young as we've ever been in our history, we've got some pretty sharp people on staff, and they are very willing to listen to what you have to say. Does it always result in a story? No, it does not. But more often than not, it does, especially if you can articulate the point that you want to get across.
I would also mention there are some very notable alumni out there of the Grand Rapids Business Journal. No.
And yes, I was Dan's managing editor when he was there.
Tim was my first mentor. Besides,
Well, I felt I had to participate today.
pulled a lot of strings there. So this is my last firing line question for everyone, and then we'll kind of go to whatever everyone finds the most interesting. Now, what is, and I think we'll start with Tim and work our way back. What do you feel is the most important local sustainability story you've covered recently? However you might define that, environmental, community, workforce, you pick.
You know, they're all important. They're all important stories, and I don't want to put emphasis on one thing over another. But for example, you know, the river restoration is coming up in Grand Rapids. Come on, people, it's the river. It runs right through the center of town. Of course it's important, and of course we see that as a sustainability story. We also see it as an economic development story. It is and is going to be a big deal. In our estimation, it'll probably change the face of Grand Rapids, and it's important that you guys get out in front of it and make it so that this town is someplace that people can be proud of based on all of the contributions that you've got to make to projects like that. We've done some fairly, I think, very interesting stories, and this is kind of an interesting juxtaposition, if you will. We have attached sustainability to everything from manufacturing to Dan and I's favorite craft beer, to B Corps, I mean, you can put the sustainability tag on just about everything if you think hard enough about it. We did a nice feature on Barfly Ventures, a young lady by the name of Autumn Sands. I think we did it within the last 6 months or so. And Autumn was a bartender at one of the Barfly Ventures venues. And she kind of caught the sustainability bug, and so she studied up on it while she was bartending. And then she was spending more time thinking about sustainability than she was bartending. And then Mark got pissed at her. And then she said, oh, okay. And then anyway, eventually she followed up and became sustainability director for Barfly. And why is that interesting? It's because somebody put their, elbow grease into it, saw something that she wanted, and basically formed her own job. And now she's head of Barfly's venture sustainability efforts. So those are the types of things we look for. We talk about zero waste, and zero waste is interesting if somebody will take the time and tell you how their company is doing it. And we've been able to get the furniture manufacturers on board to be able to tell us exactly how they do it. The Port of Muskegon is looking at, and this is horrible. I'm sorry if anybody's from Muskegon here, this is horrible, but they're looking to become a debris hub by the port. And by what that means is that they're going to take ships and they're going to take used building materials and things that may or may not be salvageable, they're going to dump them in Muskegon. Doesn't sound real attractive. But then when you figure out that all of this is going to be sorted through and reused, and then if it's not going to be reused, it's going to be disposed of properly, then that becomes kind of a sustainability story. So those are the types of things that we're looking at. And again, like I said initially, it's just interesting. I mean, it's interesting to read about. So when you're able to share those stories, I think not just the people in this room, but the Grand Rapids community as a whole becomes interested in what you're doing, and I think identifies more with what it is that's going on. Brief rundown.
I wanted to Autumn at Barfly, she created her own job through sustainability. So she, okay. So that's an interesting anecdote for me, because what I have to say in terms of regarding sustainability, and I understand that the name of this is the Sustainable Business Forum, but if you send me an email pitching me on how great your sustainability effort is, I'm going to roll my eyes, because the word sustainability has become kind of a buzzwordy thing that means a lot and means nothing at the same time. So if you can explain to me how somebody in your organization advanced through stick-to-itiveness and really, in the way that Autumn did, that's a totally legitimate story. It has a sustainability angle to it, but I'm not going to look at that and go, oh, okay, so it was all about sustainability, so therefore it's newsworthy. No, it's newsworthy because this bartender managed to work her way up in an organization that values that sort of thing. So I guess sustainability is great, and it's certainly something that businesses ought to be mindful of. But when it comes to pitching the news, and trying to get a story in the news, it's become diluted. The word is become so sort of catch-all that it doesn't get at least my juices flowing. So they're doing a sustainability initiative. Well, that's great. Who's not doing a sustainability initiative right now? Okay, so if it's not unique, then why is it newsworthy? That's the kind of thing that we take a look at. You remember when a couple of years ago when every brewery that opened in Grand Rapids got its own story? It just got saturated for a while. I do, because I had to write all those stories. after a while, it was like, all right, you're opening up a new brewery. Okay, well, I've written about every brewery that's opened in the Grand Rapids area for the last couple of years. This isn't unique anymore. This is not newsworthiness is kind of a constantly evolving criteria to some degree. And I understand that that is difficult for folks on the other end of it to wrap your minds around or your arms around to some degree. But what could be newsworthy one year might not necessarily be newsworthy the next year or the next week even. It's constantly changing. And so I think sustainability initiatives are great, but look beyond the mere fact that it's a sustainability initiative when you're trying to get the media to cover it. Why else is it interesting? The question you should be always asking yourselves when pitching a story to the media is, if I wasn't involved in this personally, would I care? And if you can't answer that question easily, then you need to rethink your pitch.
Are there any stories out there right now that you do care about and find particularly important?
Well, you started your question was what is the what
What's the story or stories you're running right now that you find the most important?
Well, Nestle's I think is a sustainability story to some degree.
We would consider Nestle worldwide they're probably not the best sustainability stories.
Well,
I think we would.
But it's interesting in terms of the sustainability angle on Nestle to me is, okay, so is their water withdrawal sustainable for the environment? Right? They want to withdraw spring water. They want to withdraw groundwater from a spring water aquifer. Is that sustainable to the environment? And right now, the jury's out on that because the state of Michigan hasn't given them their permit yet. They're still trying to figure that out. I don't look at Nestle as a sustainability story, but at the same time, there's aspects of sustainability to it. So, does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay. I think that's all I've got.
Sure. So the neat part about what we do at the Rapidian is tap into some of the other parts of our media center. So one of the features of GRTV, the public access station, as I mentioned, is something called the NPO Showcase, which spotlights a local nonprofit each week. So just pulled up a couple stories here. Recently, we had the Kent Conservation District in for one of those nonprofit showcases discussing maintaining and protecting natural resources in West Michigan. And nonprofits also get their own accounts. So we recently had a piece from the Michigan Wildlife Council about a Michigan State University Extension partnership to provide urban youth with fun educational experiences, in state parks. So our coverage varies depending on what people are discussing. As has been mentioned, water and water-related issues have been very prevalent and pertinent recently. So we've seen responses to local movements in regards to what happened in Flint with the water crisis. So we've seen coverage there. We've seen interest in the downtown river front and its development and what's happening with the rapids and with commercializing it or turning it into some kind of entertainment spot for residents downtown. So we tend to find stories from time to time that people are interested in, and as has been mentioned by the other panelists, the big important stories that are breaking, the large media organizations do those stories incredibly well. So where we step in is if somebody has something in particular that they want to bring to the forefront, they tend to come to us to tell those stories.
I think the story that I've worked on recently that was impactful to me in terms of sustainability was Standing Rock. And that seems like it's half a world away. But we did a documentary following a delegation of local Native Americans who went to stand with water protectors in North Dakota. And to bring it back to Michigan, That obviously did not go the way that they had planned, but what I think was not foreseen either by the organizers or by DAPL and folks in that business is there were a lot of people that got trained there. Michigan had, well, the Michigan tent, which was the largest single tent in all of Standing Rock, had all of the security detail trained there. And those folks are now back in Michigan and trying to figure out how to fight the different lines that are here, how to fight Flint, how to fight Nestle, how to prevent another Kalamazoo River spill. We forget about that one, but that one's still with us. That river is still not something I drink out of. So those stories sometimes, even if they seem like they're all the way, in North Dakota, and how could that impact us locally? Well, there's probably someone in West Michigan who's involved. We're kind of not the greatest destination for 6 months out of the year, so people are looking for an excuse to leave, And some people leave on vacation, some people leave to do pretty interesting work. And you can usually find somebody that's left and come back with a great story. And so whether it's you or someone you know, feel free to let us know, especially if you're, coming into this ahead of the trip and it's going to happen and you have some ideas of the kinds of stories that you're going to come back with, well, let us know. We might be able to follow you. You never know.
Of course, my favorite interview ever was when Marta Swain brings in all of her clothes from Clothing Matters. Marta, you're passionate about your work, and Nick with Local First and Rain Barrel, rain waste management. So I'm, again, able to tap into a lot of local sources. We have a good relationship with the Office of Sustainability Practices with Grand Valley. I recently had George Hartwell in to talk about sustainable lifestyles on campus, and obviously his new mission as well. I have great partnerships with the city of Grand Rapids. I'm expecting Suzanne Schultz to come in shortly to talk about affordable housing. I've spoken with, back to Grand Valley, Norman Christopher, Anne-Marie Favell to discuss honeybees and their sustainable farming. Here's the Continental Dairy Facilities. We talked about sustainability in the milk production industry. So just unique angles that we can spend 10 to 15 minutes talking about. One of the things I really want to up is my roving microphone, where I can actually go out into the community and show up at your place and bring the story back. It's been several years, but I had there was a local, or a Lansing author, his name was Doc Fletcher, and he researches rivers to ride his canoe on. And so I took the roving microphone out on the canoe and brought back that story. I've taken a ride on the Rapid bus system to talk about sustainability and why we should be riding the buses more with Peter Varga. So I want to look more toward those stories that make for good radio, and or obviously we can make social media work a bit more.
Our organization and our member companies and institutions, particularly over this past year, have been talking a lot about inclusion and how to address racial inequities in the West Michigan area. I think maybe you'd be the perfect place to start with this. Can you share a little about how that's being reflected in your coverage?
Well, it's exclusively being featured in my coverage in particular. So my title used to be, it's changing, I don't know what it is yet, but it used to be Inclusion and Equity Reporter. So what we did was we would find really any story that caught our interest, and just to echo some of the things that have been said, a good story is a good story, and you can usually find a way to cover it from your angle. So whether it's the business angle, the environmental angle, or in my case, inclusion and equity. 49507 is one of the most polluted zip codes in the country in terms of tetrachloroethylene. There was a plume there that keeps growing. I don't think it's stopped. And that's a story that impacts primarily poor, primarily black communities. So we covered that pretty well for a while. I don't know if we're still covering it because I had to step back from reporting. But that's, I guess, to keep it short, the way that we do things. We find a good story and then look through the lens that we're most specialized in. And so if you have a relationship or want to build a relationship with any one of us, and you understand the lens that we're looking at things through, that might help you with pitching your own stories.
Tim, how about the Business Journal? I feel like that's something that's I've seen a lot more of, especially in the past year, 18 months or so.
I think you have seen a lot more of that in the Business Journal. But I would be slow to say that that is absolutely intentional on our part. I think it's more of a reflection of the community. And I think that's what any media outlet does, is it reflects the community that it serves. So intentional, those are phrases that we use in the newsroom a lot during our editorial meetings. And I think that's good. I think that's really good for Grand Rapids. We had a pretty big event last week, 50 most influential women in West Michigan, and ballroom and ton of guests and a really great national speaker. But what I was really struck by at the event is the amount of energy, the amount of networking, the amount of introduction, if you will, of attendees talking to other attendees. And so when I talk about intentional, and then I'm going to apply it to a business perspective, does your business intend to become more diverse? Does your business intend to become more equitable? And there are some great examples out there in the community. Off the top of my head, well, I can think of a couple. In the design, build, construction arena, Bazzani and Rockford Construction have both, within the last year, reached out to members of minorities, communities, and intentionally put them on staff, and then intentionally went out to try and understand better those ethnically diverse communities from which those people came from. And to me, that's pretty important. And we did stories on both of those. Kiran and I were just chatting a little bit before this thing started, and I asked her, she had happened to mention that she comes to us from Iowa, and I happened to say, what draws you here? And she told me, and I don't know that she wants to share it, so I'm not going to share it with you, but it then got me thinking about the last 3 reporters that we have hired have come to us from California, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, which is quite a departure for us. And I think what we're trying to do when we're looking at diversity is it's not always just racial diversity or ethnicity, it's also looking at the world through different eyes. And I mentioned to Kiran, I've born and raised here, so I've always felt that West Michigan was kind of a closed community, kind of a place where we all marched to the same tune. And I think that's changing, and I think a lot of that change is being led within the business community. So yeah, I mean, I guess you're right, Dan. I guess we have, and somebody mentioned this to me recently also. We have a feature in the Business Journal called Inside Track, and each week we profile someone within the community who's leading something, a nonprofit, a business, a corporation, and we do what we do traditionally call just a feature on these people. Hey, Allison, you were one, right? There you go. Okay, so it's about what this person does, but it's also about how he or she got to that position and what led them there. And to us, that's important. Well, anyway, to finish the story, somebody said, wow, you're really doing a lot of women for your Inside Track. Well, that's not by design. It's not that we're going out and looking for women. We're looking to find leaders within the community to profile, and it just happens to be that there are a lot more women coming through the pipeline now than there has been ever before. So that's kind of I mean, is that what you were driving at? You know, that's the way we look at it. You know, even though we talk about intentional in the newsroom and looking for things that are, you know, people or organizations that are doing something intentionally, ironically, we're not necessarily doing that in our own newsroom in terms of some of the stuff that we feature on the Inside Track. Which way do you want me to go? I'll bring it this way. Sorry, Garrett.
I guess either Garrett or Kiran. Maybe Kiran, because you have the mic, and I think Tim kind of gave you a shout out there.
Sure. So one of the things that I'm most proud of as far as the Rapidian's coverage is concerned is our ear to the ground when it comes to what's happening in all segments of the community amongst all residents and all types of individuals. So we certainly pride ourselves on telling stories that, as I said earlier, may not be reflected elsewhere. For example, last June, the Grand Rapids Asian Festival was held for the very first time downtown. This was really started by one man who had a vision and wanted to do something so he could inspire his son to remember his Asian culture as he grows up in West Michigan. So he set out to create the Grand Rapids Asian Festival. And I'm very proud to say the Rapidian was one of the first organizations to have that story. WGVU was there and did a great job. We were also both at the Lunar Festival, so some people are paying attention, but not everyone is paying attention yet to these stories. This was a festival that had hundreds of people right downtown at Rosa Parks Circle, and I'm not confident that that story was absolutely everywhere. And it should be, because the Asian community is here in Grand Rapids. We're present, we're doing great things, and we're one of many diverse segments that are doing important things. So we look to tell those stories. We feature works from writers who write in Spanish. We had a couple pieces published in regards to the Day Without Immigrant March, so we had that story in English, but then we had someone translate it to Spanish too. We're hoping to do more of those stories. We just need people who are willing to translate that for us. I'm conversational Spanish, but that translation would have to come from someone who speaks fluently. So we're really aware that there are lots and lots of stories out there that need to be told. It's incredibly important. This is an incredibly diverse city, and there are certain segments that don't have their voices told. So we're also intentional in where we do our trainings, as I mentioned. So we do them at the library, but we also did one last fall at Granville Area Arts and Humanities. So we're trying to go where the residents are. So we don't always have to have them come to us, but bring our sessions to them. So a desire to cover this entire city is embedded in absolutely everything we do, and that is going to grow. And as diverse segments of the community continue to grow, expect to see more of those stories. And also expect it not to be, when you do cover those kind of stories, it shouldn't necessarily be pointed out. It should just be how coverage is done. You should just be featuring the voices of all types of community members. I mean, it should just go without saying. You don't need to applaud yourself every time you do it. You should just be doing it. So expect to see more stories like that.
Daniel and audience, one of the segments that I truly enjoy is called Arts and Access Forum on the morning show. We bring in those on behalf of DisArt, a nonprofit led by Dr. Chris Smith and Jill Vinn that designs programming specifically for those with disabilities. So that is another segment that we want to make sure that their voice is out and that their upcoming events are shared as well. So it's on a monthly basis, thanks to those on part of DisArt. So a whole nother opportunity.
Okay, so the question was, you know,
Diversity and inclusion.
diversity and inclusion, and how is it reflected in our coverage? I think the West Michigan area has had a diversity and inclusion issue for a long time. I don't think this is news to anybody. I feel like I remember covering economic club speeches or chamber meetings or reports where this was identified as a talent retention issue, and I'm pretty sure I remember being at the Wealthy Theater for a university demographer from Southern California who essentially looked at all the data and said, well, Grand Rapids is going to be 25% Latino in by 2025. And to me, I was sort of shocked. But when you thought about it, it starts to make sense. I think overall, in the media environment in the area needs to do a better job of highlighting some of the perceptions about inclusion in the Grand Rapids area. That I think Tim touched on this a little bit, but yeah, there's kind of a perception I think in the Grand Rapids area of this sort of insular Dutch, primarily Christian community that isn't necessarily welcoming in terms of diversity and inclusion. I don't necessarily think personally that is 100% accurate, but that's the perception among many people. But at the same time, I'm getting a little far afield of my particular topic of expertise. And in terms of how MLive's and the Grand Rapids Press addresses this, you know, we really try to be a mirror for the community and what's going on, and I think you're seeing a lot of coverage of the city's relations with its police department. I think that would be a place where this particular question is really you know, coming to the fore. You know, the racial bias study with city police, the way that you know the police officers are seem to be fairly quick to pull their firearms on children, and you know. Right now, there's a lot of discussion right now as to whether that should be, well, what there needs to be more training. You know, how do we keep that from happening? And so, you know, our coverage of diversity and inclusion we try to mirror the community's coverage or the community's experience with it. Another thing that I'd love to see, you know, media-wide and throughout the area is more coverage of the affordability issue of living in Grand Rapids. It's becoming a more expensive place to live. I personally had to move out of the city limits, you know, myself not too long ago in order to find, you know, living situations that I could handle. So, you know, that has lots of you know, diversity and racial and economic, you know, equity components to it. The housing situation. We're certainly following that, but I think to some degree there's a bit of a rah-rah coverage tone to the coverage across the media outlets in West Michigan, in terms of how great how strong the housing market is, and how you know it's a great place to raise a family, and you know the market's just going gangbusters. Well, that makes it difficult for middle class people and lower income people to find quality housing, and so that's, you know, that's something that I'd personally love to see a little bit more emphasis put on.
Yeah, and this, depending on the discussion, this might be our last question before we turn it over to audience questions. And I think this one will go to you to start, Garret. Though it's often couched in kind of the terms of a marketing or community relations buzzword. The root of sustainability as our organization approached it was as a beyond compliance and risk management idea that we should start doing things a little differently, because what happens if we keep doing it the way this happens, and we have been, and bad things occur. And when you have these discussions, universally the media comes up. As in, well, we really don't want the media finding out about that. So I'm curious if you can share some thoughts about the traditional role of the media in holding local institutions, including businesses, accountable for their actions, and how it's evolving today.
You want me to talk about Wolverine?
Not specifically. I'll let you go however you want.
Yes.
Wolverine is a valued member of ours. I mentioned that, and they have not done us wrong. It's a cornerstone of society. In order to be self-governing, the people need to have the information in order to make informed decisions. They need to know what their government and corporate citizens are doing in order to, be informed members of society and make important decisions about, how to vote, how to spend your money, all those sorts of things. So we take that pretty seriously. We take our role as a public watchdog seriously. That is certainly something that we talk about at MLive. I talk about it with our editors. Accountability for institutions, state agencies, companies. Anyone who's got power and influence really deserves to be questioned, deserves to be, the citizenry, the readers, the viewers, the listeners, that's what they expect, I think, and they want out of journalism today, is somebody who's willing to ask tough questions and be fearless in the way that we go about our reporting. And so, I think that has very much been a personal philosophy that I've tried to follow in the way that I report stories, the way I select stories to report, the way I follow stories. It comes from a place where we want, I'm attempting to get as much information about any particular situation that I'm covering into the public as possible. Sometimes that means I'm writing a long-form traditional story. Sometimes that means we're putting out a video of an interview that was done. Sometimes that means I'm taking documents and I'm posting them on Twitter. That it's any way to get more information out there. So people who are following the story, people who are interested are able to, have as much, be able to make decisions, form opinions, and that sort of thing. Does that answer your question? It does very much. And would anyone like to comment that? Perhaps if it's helpful for those who don't necessarily perceive accountability as part of their mission. Maybe we can also talk a little bit about the role of the media in helping to build a strong and vibrant local community. So whichever direction you'd like to take that.
Sure, I can talk about that. So city leaders, for example, often pride themselves on going and conducting listening sessions and going to neighborhoods and hosting events. So it's important that they know what residents care about. And all of us incorporate citizens in our coverage, not just the leaders and officials whose voices matter, but the people that are voting and attending school districts. So we certainly try hard to feature their voices in our stories too, because their voices matter.
Mariano, Shelley?
Sure, so could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Can you talk about the role of the media in either accountability or in helping develop a strong community?
Yeah, actually, in that sense, I think you captured it. I think our role as the, I guess, the purveyors of information that citizens need to make good decisions in citizenship is, I think, more critical now than it's been in my lifetime anyway. So I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to, speak in front of folks and to say, yeah, our work matters, here's why. But I mean, also, I'm biased. I think that this is an important job. I think this is a job where if citizens are not given the right information or they're given curated information, and I mean, we just had this, there's very clear evidence that our Facebook feeds have been tampered with to give us information that feeds a particular narrative. If I'm only getting that, it's very difficult to make the decisions that I need to make so that they impact not just me in the right way, but those around me, and build community, not just benefit my bottom line personally. So I think media has not just the role, but the responsibility now more than ever to take its journalistic integrity seriously and push forward with accurate information.
Good. And I think if you're a guest of the, if you want to be or need to be a guest of the program, send your best spokesperson. It does matter the energy level you put into putting your word out. Also, be your own cheerleader. Spread your interview via your social media channels. That's a good way to be part of your own cheerleader and to be part of your own getting your own message out.
Well, we have time for 7 minutes or so of audience questions. Does anyone have a question for our panel? You? Okay. I think Klaus wanted.
I'm just curious, as you go and cover stories that are similar again and again and again, are there any things you wish we in the public were more able to see, that you're kind of surprised despite the number of times you've covered something, we still don't seem to get it?
Just make sure that you know your contact information when you're asked. Sometimes the president and CEO doesn't know their own email. Nobody in here. Just always be prepared and nothing's off the record, at least in my case.
Just to echo what Garret said, I think the affordable housing issue is huge. And it may not affect you, it may, but there are people here who are getting pushed out of neighborhoods that they live in, and no matter how much we talk about the process, I've actually been part of a city process to try to do community engagement along the South Division corridor, which has, for as long as I've been here, and that's over 2 decades, it's been a predominantly Latino neighborhood. And now there's this eye on it saying, ooh, we could make money off of that. And those people are likely to get pushed out, not tomorrow, but maybe in a few years. And so no matter how much I report on, hey, this is an issue, this is not a sustainable way of developing neighborhoods, people just don't care about the process. And area-specific plans are a good way to protect your neighborhood from having 12 high-rises that take up all the parking. I mean, I wouldn't want one of those next door. But people don't pay attention when it's time to pay attention, and I can't seem to get people excited about, like, hey, area-specific plans, you should care, because that could be you next time.
Yeah, I want to second that. We tend to get frustrated when, I guess in a personally, you write a story, you spend weeks, months, making sure it's bulletproof, that your facts are solid, corroborate things through interviews, do a very detailed analysis to make sure that you're on the right track, and then you get an email from somebody asking a question about it that they could very well have just Googled the answer to or read the story beyond the headline. And so I guess, in terms of the public, I think there's a responsibility on their end too, I think, to read critically and to pay attention to the construction of stories and why things are written the way they are and what's in and what's not in, if you email me with a very solid question about why something was done, I'm happy to, respond and say, well, this is why it was written in this way and that sort of thing. But I do tend to get annoyed when people email me questions that, it's like, that's on a Wikipedia page, or, that's on the EPA or the DEQ's website, and if you just, instead of emailing me, you just literally punched your question into Google, you could have it answered yourself. So, I would love to see more people in the public take kind of a greater hand and be active information seekers rather than just sort of passive readers.
Robert, did you have a question? Or Dave, go ahead. Okay, Robert, I think.
I had one, and Garret, too. I read everything you put in the paper about water, because I think we're over our head in water in a number of places. One of them is ever-increasing flood levels on the Grand River. I'm on the Rural River Watershed Partners. I'm involved with Elgrove. But we need 100% cooperation.
Robert, we are a little low on time. If
You've cut me off already. I think we got a problem with ever-increasing flood levels in the Grand River. I think development doesn't understand it. We don't mitigate enough, and we're going to. I used to live in Grand Rapids. I live in Rockford, but I worry about Grand Rapids. George Hartwell dug his heels in and said, I don't want to build my flood walls any higher, and I understand it. But in the last go-around, Walker's increasing their flood levels, which is going to put even more water in the channel. It's going to kind of back upstream to Comstock
Robert, I'll
Park.
reiterate that if.
Right, so just a minute. Comstock Park and North Park, and that's a big issue.
I agree. Just to real briefly respond is, I think we would all probably agree that part of the record flooding that we've seen over the last, increasing over the last few years, is due to just the way development is done. Developing in the floodplains, impermeable parking lots, all sorts of things that really do kind of get back to the idea of sustainable business. So it's a good thing to bring up. I think you're very on the nose in terms of identifying that as a problem that we'll be dealing with more in the future.
Dave has one last question here.
It's probably a little bit of a touchy question, but in today's environment where when we hear news stories we don't like, we find them to be dismissed as fake news, how do you guys react to what we see as the trend that's happening out there, and what might common citizens try to do to reverse what seems to be a pretty serious attack on information gathering as a whole?
I don't pay much heed to people who try to pass what we do off as fake news. The folks who cry fake news are the same ones who just kind of stick their head in the sand when they don't want to hear or they don't want to acknowledge what the problem is that's being addressed. I think media organizations have started to show their work more in terms of, like, okay, it's not just here's the report, here's the documents that back up that report. And so fake news is just sort of I think the modern incarnation of criticism. It's just the term for it now, and it's catchy, and it's being promoted at the highest levels of our government, which is new. But the notion of people criticizing media or criticizing coverage they don't like as biased or fake, that's not new. And so, I think the best thing non-journalists, people who read the paper or read online, could do is to support the organizations that they trust. Buy a subscription, follow the reporters on Twitter and social media who you think are doing a good job, promote good work in your own social media channels, recognize good work. That's how I think you combat fake news, at least from an individual perspective.
Sure. There's a saying that I learned in journalism school, which is, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. I'm sure these other reporters know what I'm talking about. Trust but verify. The burden of that falls on individual consumers. There's just no other way to put it. It is each one of your responsibility to ensure that what you're consuming is true. That means popping that name into a search engine, finding it at least in 2 different places, if not 3, to make sure that this is a real person with a real job and a real website and a real title. It's easy to do, but it's your responsibility. We do our best to ensure that what we're giving you is absolutely accurate. That's our responsibility, but we're in this together. Everyone benefits when accurate information is out there, so we all take that responsibility seriously, but community members should too.
Will you please join me in thanking our panel?